Hello, everybody. Thanks for jumping into the distribution team demo for this week. As I'm on triage, today's Thursday, February 18. Today I'm going to run through the MR in the GitLab chart for supporting migration from Gitaly to Praefect. The scenario here is that there's a deployment of the Helm chart with just basic settings using one Gitaly node, and then we'll turn on Praefect and its backing Gitaly nodes and transfer repositories over, and then remove the old standalone Gitaly. Praefect is becoming more of a hot topic lately, so figured it was a good time to touch base with the team and show what's going on with it lately. So the MR is here, and in the demo notes, I have already launched an instance in GKE, and that's here. All I have so far is Praefect enabled false, which is the default anyway. And so what I'm going to do now that step one is done is go to step two, which is just create a project. So we have something to migrate. Just give it a README. So the project is there. I'll quickly go over to the admin area and show Gitaly servers is just the default. So it points directly to that standalone Gitaly instance. So what we'll do now is uncomment this section. So now we'll do Praefect enabled true. This is a new key that's part of this MR. Replace internal Gitaly is now set to false. By default, this is true. So if you turn on Praefect, what will happen is that the standalone Gitaly stateful set will not be deployed, and instead only the Praefect managed Gitaly instances will be created. So by setting this to false, we're actually going to keep the existing standalone Gitaly stateful set running, and alongside it, deploy the Praefect managed Gitaly instances. So by default, there's a virtual storage for Praefect named default, because there always has to be a storage named default in GitLab. What we're going to do here is because we already have, we're keeping the old Gitaly stateful set running, which already has the storage name of default. What we're going to do is just pick anything else. In this case, I've just been doing VS2 for virtual storage 2 and putting Praefect after it, just to be clear where it's managed. The Gitaly replicas and max and available are similar to the settings you could do with standalone Gitaly, just showing how many replicas will come up. So what we're going to do here is create a new storage called VS2 Praefect. And so the default and VS2 Praefect storages will both be connected in GitLab. And that's what will allow us to kick off the migrations API to migrate the repositories to that specified storage. And then after that, we can actually turn off the old one. So I will go ahead and redeploy. There's one manual step in here where we have to create the database by hand. So as that comes up, we'll go down to our Postgres chart, pod. Now we're in, create a role, grab the secret, release name here is GitLab. There's our password. That's it. So now you'll notice we've got our Praefect pods coming up. Then you'll also see we have our old Gitaly 0 pod still running. And then since we specified 2 Gitaly replicas for our virtual storage 2, you'll see the storage name in the stateful set as was released last time, and you'll see both pods there under that storage name. insufficient CPU. That should be okay. So as those pods come up, we'll just confirm that those storages appear under here. Now here we go. So now we've still got that old default storage, but now we also have VS2 Praefect. So now what I have is I have two scripts here. This is from the migrations API docs. Effectively, we're going to have a token created in this instance already. So let me go to create that. And it's going to need the API and read API scopes. And I'll delete this after the demo. I'm just going to put that in a file called token.txt for my script to read. So as these come up, I think we should be okay. I still see one web service pod is coming up. What I'm going to do is effectively just run this move.sh script, which will basically make a curl request. So you can see our source storage name here is going to be default. If I go back to the admin area, Gitaly servers, we're going to go from default over to VS2 Praefect. So in my script, I have the source is default, and then the destination storage name VS2 Praefect, and then my URL here. So we got a message accepted. That's good. If your API token doesn't have the correct scope, you'll get an unauthorized response here. Otherwise, it should take it. And then there's a second part where you can actually query the status of the moves. So what we're going to do is run check.sh, and we'll pipe it to JQ for readability. Cool. So with this response here, you'll see the state is finished. In the past, when I was testing this and it failed, I would see just a failed message there. So you can see my before Praefect repository was moved, and the one that comes by default, the monitoring project, was moved. So effectively now there's nothing stored on the default Gitaly storage, so we can actually remove it. So the next step here is, wrong window, is to go to the next block. So now we'll migrate projects to VS2 Praefect, which is what we just did. So now we'll go uncomment this last section. So now we'll still have Praefect enabled as true. Now we turn replace internal Gitaly to true, whereas before it was false. So now it will actually replace that standalone Gitaly instance. And then we still have this same virtual storage that will still exist, but now we can actually, since we're removing the old default virtual storage, we can add the default storage, because remember, there always has to be a storage name called default. So we will do one final upgrade. So we should see that pod disappear, and a few more pods pop up under the default storage name. Perfect. So these three are launching now, and Gitaly 0 is terminating. And once they're up, I will refresh this page and confirm that those storages are connected. Give a second for Praefect and GitLab to catch up to the change. A little slow today. Now this page has configuration coming from web service itself because there's the GitLab YAML that specifies all the storages to connect to. So as these new pods come up, they're going to get that new configuration as templated by the chart. So we must still be hitting this old pod. Just gonna go ahead and bounce it. Oh, did it on its own. One last thing is as we're looking at this, obviously the projects are all going to be stored in VS2 Praefect at this time, and default will be empty. So one possible option that's not required is to adjust this script to change the source storage name from VS2 Praefect over to default. You could shift all the projects over to the default storage. That migrations API can be used anytime, whenever you want to shift between projects. So now the pods are up. They all have the new configuration. We've got default, which is a Praefect virtual storage, and VS2 Praefect, same thing. And so if we go back, we should still be able to load our project from before Praefect. There you go. No errors. That's really it. So a bulk of the work of this MR was adjusting the logic to be able to get standalone Gitaly to deploy alongside Gitaly with Praefect. And so you'll notice that we've split out most of the spec into their own separate files so that they can be ingested by either standalone Gitaly or Praefect. That's the biggest change you'll notice there. That's about it for the demo. Are there any questions on that?
Mostly a curiosity. Back in your values.yaml, if we go back there, the step number 4, if we reapplied that, I'm curious what the effect of replace internal Gitaly would have now that we have just the virtualized Gitaly or virtualized storages. Is that just now basically get ignored, or is that going to cause more damage?
Yeah, that replace internal Gitaly is kind of a switch on which resource to deploy. So if I go to the Gitaly templates, you'll see here we have all the resources are split out into individual spec files, so they can be either included by service with Praefect, for example, or just service.
Okay.
And so that's really just the guard. So effectively, it's just allowing certain resources to get templated or not. That's basically the extent of the logic of replace internal Gitaly there. Part of the MR is that we adjusted the logic, replace internal Gitaly. We put it into a template here. So
if it's a switch to which resources get applied, does that mean that at any future deployments of the Helm chart to this cluster would need to have that turned on? Otherwise, it would switch it back to using the internal Gitaly?
yes, the default is under values here, replace internal. So the default if you turn on Praefect is that it will replace internal Gitaly. And so the same logic will apply even with this new flag. This is effectively only in the scenario where you did not have Praefect in the past and you want to migrate to using Praefect and get those repositories migrated over. If you don't set this, it will keep the default of true and still just replace internal Gitaly. And if you have Praefect off, standalone Gitaly will still be.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, good. I'm just trying to understand the scenario there.
Mm-hmm. Good question. Anything else?
Looks good, man.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I know there's some issues now where the teams want to start enabling Praefect by default in the charts. So I think topics related to Praefect start coming up more and more often. So I don't think it's quite at a point where we're ready to enable it by default, just because we're looking for a little bit more out of the logs and a little bit clearer documentation on how Praefect works, especially when scaling up and down. Obviously, that value that I set for Gitaly replicas is very easy to configure, but if you bump it up or down, Praefect gets a little bit angry at the storage names now that it's keeping track of those in the database. So we've got some open issues I'll log in the demo notes here where we're talking about with those teams. But for now, at least the migration, if you didn't have Praefect in the past, will work just fine.
Nice work.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.